Welcome to the course. We're so glad you're taking this course with us.
We thought about this as an idea for one of the new courses for Seminary for Everyone, because both of us have led together with men and women in different teams and different spaces, and we've seen that there's a need for a conversation about how to do that well. And we know we've heard from some of you that this is a type of training and type of resource that would really be beneficial.
Yeah, we see the need, the conflict between men and women trying to lead together, but also the joy and the fun of it. And so it's really an opportunity to teach this course with my friend Stephanie, and we haven't had a chance to teach something like this before. So This is kind of us together doing a little bit of the shared work together.
Yeah, what we're talking about.
Yeah, while we teach this course.
Yeah, we've both had so many chances to lead with other people, but this is a chance for us to do this together and to invite you all in. So welcome. We're glad that you're going to join us in this. And we hope that as we go through this course that we will be able to hear from many different leaders and to hear from you what you're learning, and it'll be a chance to learn from each other. So what we're going to do for this lecture is we're going to talk about kind of what we both see as kind of the state of where things are when it comes to men and women leading together. And then we're going to talk about some leadership lessons that we see from Jesus' life when it comes to this subject.
When I think about the state of where we find ourselves as far as men and women working together, both in the workplace and in the church, what stands out most to me is the history of many men not treating women well. They've sexually harassed women, or they have excluded women from leadership. Note those two extremes. On the one hand, men have preyed on women. On the other hand, men have ignored women. Sometimes it has been the same men, preying on some and sidelining others. I assume, safely I think, that the men taking this course do not want to be those men. Numerous studies of organizations have found not only that women can be effective leaders, but often help groups achieve their goals even better than men. For example, businesses founded by women ultimately deliver higher revenue, more than twice as much per dollar invested than those founded by men, making women-owned companies better investments for financial backers, one study said. And another study said women score higher than men in most leadership skills. It is mixed-gendered teams, according to a number of studies, that tend to do best in terms of sales and profits and research discoveries. Quote, the advantages of gender-diverse teams increase as the team's gender mix becomes more balanced. And yet, a host of social science studies show that more people in workplaces have negative perceptions of women than men, even when those perceptions are unfair. More see women as selfish if they negotiate for themselves, or as out of control if they express anger, or as inexperienced rather than promising when they are young, or that they talk too much when the study actually demonstrates that none of those things are true. Why are these biases present? Biological tendencies have been exacerbated by sin and have been ensconced in culture over time. It's true that 10 or 20 times more testosterone in men than women tends to make men, on average, stronger physically and more aggressive and risk-taking and status-seeking. Sin exacerbates this. So instead of channeling these tendencies to help, sometimes they are used to bully. And those tendencies are deeply ensconced in human culture. And how are women to respond to this? By pushing themselves forward and throwing sharp elbows and not apologizing and never letting them see you express emotion so as to hold their own in a man's world? There may be a backlash if women do. Or if women sit back and wait to be asked and avoid interrupting it and wait until the boorish generation dies off, is that a good strategy? No, that's passive and hopeless. We see a different way in the Bible. We see men and women working together collaboratively, respecting one another, drawing out the gifts of one another. With Ruth and Boaz, there is service and empowerment. With Abigail and David, there is reasoning and listening to one another. With Priscilla and Aquila and Apollos and Paul, there is conversation and helping each other out. Christians in any workplace, churches, and Christian organizations can model a better way.
I absolutely agree that we can model a better way. And the truth is that women have experienced being held back from their potential because of a lot of these points that Andy has just made. But this has resulted in a lot of pain. It's resulted in a lot of hurt and a lot of suffering. There's been a lot of grief and a lot that's still yet to grieve, I think, for many women, especially women that have experienced the most deepest and most painful experiences that Andy mentioned at the beginning. But also, I would say that I've seen that women have developed a deep resilience in a lot of ways. You can see this in a lot of different cultures where women have been able to grow in their strength in ways that aren't always noted and aren't always named because of the opposition that they've faced and because they've had to work twice as hard to be able to do certain things in different societies and to have a chance to be able to move forward. So resilience is a good thing, but the truth is that that comes at a cost. And it doesn't just come at a cost to women, it comes at a cost to everyone. Because what's true is that when women thrive, everybody thrives. And when women are held back, that holds society back, generally speaking. And so I know, like Andy said, if there's men that are on this, a part of this class, we're so glad that you're here. And we know that you want to be different than some of what ends up on the front page of newspapers and ends up getting sometimes highlighted as the atrocities of the way men and women treat each other. But what I'm hoping that you see is that when women thrive, that's good for you too. And it's good for the boys that are growing up around us and the little girls. And so I just see that as an encouraging thing that as I've watched women grow and step into the God-given callings that they have and their potential and begin to go from surviving to thriving because they find healthy co-leading teams where men and women are leading together, and that flourishing that happens in those women's lives, it overflows out of their life onto the people around them. And you see it being something that's good, not just for them, but for everybody who's around them. It's so important that we continue to remember that all of us are made in the image of God. And so when we engage that image bearing in one another, that is true for both genders, that's a good thing for all of us overall. But it is true that thriving is not how many women have experienced leadership. Not in the public sphere, not in the private sphere, not in the ministry sphere. For many women, they would say maybe they've seen growth, but thriving isn't necessarily where they're at. So when I say what's the state of things, it's not yet that most women feel that they're thriving. But I do believe that it can be different. And I do believe that there's lots of examples of positive, of women who have overcome, of men and women leading well together, of men who are strong and great leaders who also are humble servants. And I hope that's many of us here. But I think that for us, we just unashamedly turn first and foremost to the example of Jesus.
In this course, we're going to interview and converse with some other good leaders. And obviously, some of you are excellent leaders and know good leaders. But we're going to take this opportunity in this first lecture to look at the life of Jesus and how he interacted with women as an example, as a model, as a catalyst to how we might talk about how men and women can work together.
So we're going to look at 4 distinctions that we see in Jesus' leadership when it comes to how he engages women. The first distinction that we see is that Jesus sought out women in healthy ways. He sought out different women, and we can give different examples, and we will here in a minute. But what you're going to see throughout Jesus' life in ministry, if you read through the Gospels, is that he had healthy relationships with women, none of which whom became spouses, obviously, or romantic relationships.
For example, Jesus was friends with Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus. This was familial interaction. He was respectful to his mother. These are healthy, warm relationships between Jesus and women.
The second distinction that we see is that Jesus engaged women and offered dignity in the ways that he engaged them. We need to remember that the first century culture valued women much less than the cultures that are around us today, that most of us are familiar with at least. Most women were not educated. Most women in that times were treated quite differently, and to the point of almost being treated like property at times in different spaces, rather than as individuals. Jesus offered dignity to women that he engaged with when we see these different snapshots in Scripture. One that I'll bring up is the picture that we often talk about between Mary and Martha, and almost this dialogue of who's doing the proper thing when Martha's working and Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet. But one of the things we sometimes miss in that picture is that it wasn't just that it was a good thing that Mary was spending time with Jesus, but that she was sitting with the other male disciples in a posture of being a disciple, which Jesus then said was a good thing, which was offering dignity to her in a way that you wouldn't see with rabbis and women, in the way that Jesus was expressing, this is a good thing, Mary, that you sit at my feet as a disciple.
When I think of Jesus, I think of how he encouraged women to think and engage and dialogue One longer example we see is Jesus bantering with the woman at the well. They had a theological discussion. He also surprised his mother with a zinger at age 12 that of course he needed to be in the temple. And then he asked the Canaanite woman whether he should feed dogs. And he called out the bleeding woman who had touched him. And he permitted Lazarus to die by delaying and therefore provoked this conversation with Mary about the resurrection. Mary thought he was the gardener on Easter morning. He talked with the woman who was accused of adultery, as no one condemned you. He defended the woman using perfume on his feet and the widow giving her mite. Is it fair to say that Jesus lightly teased, lovingly teased, winked, raised his eyebrows when he talked with women? He was a teacher, a rabbi, a dialogue partner who took their ideas, their minds seriously. He didn't talk down to them. He engaged with them.
The third distinction we see is that Jesus invited women to support the mission. And we see that carried out then through the beginning of the early church. Even though women are not mentioned as often in the stories in the Gospels, scholars have reason to believe that women were there along the journey, all along the way. We see pictures of that throughout the writings, even though it wasn't as common to mention women in stories in the first century. But you see, like, for instance, in Luke 8, where Mary Magdalene and Joanna were considered those who were supporting Jesus' ministry financially. They were helping to bankroll this mission that Jesus had. It was cultural then to name men more than women, but we do see leaders that were women named throughout the New Testament, and we certainly see that the women were there all along the way as Jesus' ministry unfolded in the Gospels.
For Jesus, accomplishing his mission had nothing to do with ordering people around. He called his disciples friends rather than servants. And he was appalled when they were arguing about where they would sit around the throne, telling them that their thinking was like that of the pagan who primarily thinks of leadership as exercising authority over people, telling them what to do, relishing your status as famous and powerful. No, said Jesus, not so with you. Jesus' understanding of leadership is more practical and collaborative. It has to do with getting things done in the right way with as many as want to join in. He opens the banquet to everyone. And women are part of Jesus' entourage, hosting, talking with the disciples. It's a group effort, and they're part of it. Finally, women were part of multiplying the mission. Women were part of leading in the early church. We see the band of women surrounding Jesus. We later see a similar group of men and women around Paul. Lydia hosts, Junia is an apostle, Priscilla and Aquila teach Apollos, Phoebe delivers a letter. Paul greets many women at the end of the book of Romans. And traditional gender roles are so upset that Paul is to give extensive reflection and counsel in 1 Corinthians about, yes, continue to have sex with your spouse, but not with prostitutes, and that it is fine, even best, to be single, and that some mutual retention of basic gender norms in 1 Corinthians 11 and retention of sexual morality are still important in this end of the age as Paul and his community see it. Rich widows have gone wild for heresy, according to 1 Timothy. My point is that this is not a movement that stresses hierarchy and tradition and everything is clean and tidy with regard to gender. Women are central to the early church's community life and mission, and the upheaval needs sorting out and cleaning up, but it's not entirely squelched. It's encouraged. It's tidied up a little bit so that they can continue with the growth of the mission.
So now as we look back on the history of the church from those early days until today, we see that it continues to kind of just be a messy group of people trying to figure this out. But what we do see is that women were a part of all the significant awakenings or revivals or different words that we might use for significant moments when we look back. Even when we sometimes look back and say, oh, we're seeing these church fathers. Well, there was women that were a part of every step of the way. And even though it continues to be something that we're wrestling with together, we know that we have seen that women will figure out how to follow Jesus no matter what, even when they haven't been fully empowered to do so. We see how women have been so critical in history in many cultures, all cultures, and how God uses women in the home, in the church, in the marketplace, in the workplace. God uses women in all of those spaces when we look back on history till today.
As we continue with this course, you will hear from various leaders who have experience leading together with the opposite gender. There are great examples of how God is leading us to empower each other and serve alongside each other. We have both had these experiences. My wife is a pastor at a church, and she's served at 3 different churches, and we're constantly processing and talking about how to work together with people. On faculty here at Bethel Seminary, we're constantly working as a team of men and women to educate and help form students in the best ways we can. And there's interaction, and we make mistakes, and we apologize, and we work forward, and we have really warm, great relationships. Honestly, I don't think that the male-female dynamics have been something that has sunk me in any of my jobs or even any of the communities I've worked with. We've actually been able to work together, work through things in positive ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I co-lead with most of the most important men in my life. I think of working with my husband in different ways that he's not on staff at our church, but he serves our church for me as lead pastor, similar to what you're saying with your wife. Mm-hmm. I think about my brother and I who do family business work together. I think of starting my church in the first place with my friend Michael, who we met here at Bethel Seminary and planted our church together, seeing the opportunity to lead a church together as a man and a woman, as, like you said at the beginning, something that would be healthy for a new church community. So we have seen some really awesome and great experiences, but it doesn't mean that we haven't noticed the pain and seen the things that have been difficult for so many people. And so we don't want to discount those painful experiences. If you're somebody who has experienced it, either men or women, have experienced the deepest parts of the brokenness that comes from men and women working together in ways that the enemy has really gotten involved, then we want you to know we see that and we hear that. And we want you to know that the reconstructive goal of this course is in no way meant to discount the experience that you might have had. We see this curse on relationships between men and women since the fall, and that's really the origin of the story. And so brokenness is something that I think we can expect because we saw that right there in the beginning of Genesis. And we want then to choose to join God in figuring out how we can empower each other by the empowerment of the Holy Spirit to reverse the curse, I sometimes call it, and move from powering over that we see that curse is going to lead to, and rather leading in a way that we lift each other up and come alongside each other as brothers and sisters.